7 shots can happen in 3 seconds.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the 1%er podcast. Sam and I got a great guest for you. He's a vet from the 75th Ranger Regiment. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. You've probably seen his viral video. His name is Greg Andreson. He's a police officer from the Port of Seattle who was talking about a lot of the restrictions and the COVID pandemic and everything like that. But thank you so much, Greg, for being on the show.
Hey,
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
I told you just introduce him as a motherfucking badass. So we appreciate you, Greg. Thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your history and kind of who you were prior to everything going on? You know, I know you're in the military, you did some contracting. So how did that come all about?
Yeah, so I mean, like a lot of 18-year-old kids, I didn't know what I wanted to do leaving high school. I hated school. That's all I knew. That was my whole mindset with school. I wanted to get away from it. So I figured, you know what, I'll try the military. And, it's just by chance. I was like, you know what, if I'm going to give the military 4 years of my life, I might as well try and do something really difficult for those 4 years. So right out of the gates, I was thinking Army Ranger or Navy SEAL. And it was just by chance. I clicked with the Army guys at the recruiting station. And none of them were Rangers or SEALs. It was just, the guy working in the office. And I went in there, I was like, I think the Army guys are a little cooler. And not knowing anything about the services, just signed up for the Army, went into the Ranger Regiment, and it ended up working out real well, man. Mid enlistment was 9/11. So that was a huge shift in just military mindset, military operations, and our op tempo and deployments and whatnot. And deployed to Afghanistan a few times with the Ranger Regiment. And then when I got out in late 2003, the military contracting was blowing up. And so I don't know if you guys are familiar with that at all, but basically a lot of U.S. agencies started to offer special operations combat veterans jobs to redeploy overseas and do security for different departments. And so I got picked up by State Department and did about 5 years with them in Iraq. And so that took me up to about 2009. And after that, I got married and my wife became pregnant. And she's like, she'd been with me for 10 different deployments. She goes, yeah, exactly. Right. And she's like, if we're going to do this family thing, it's probably time to put this behind us. And I agreed, that had actually been my 14th deployment. And started looking at different things stateside and ended up going into law enforcement like a lot of veterans do. And I worked in Los Angeles for about 5 years and then moved up to Seattle and was with the Port of Seattle from 2017 all the way up until the video that got all the notoriety on May 5th.
Okay. I'm curious, what was your experience like being in LA versus up in Seattle?
When I was in Los Angeles, I was with Marshal Service, and that's a federal agency. And its mission is just very different. I wasn't on the streets doing patrol level policing. I did the Marshal Service. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all, but it's a federal agency that's in charge of all the judicial security. So it's a lot of courthouse stuff. It's a lot of prisoner stuff. And then they're also in charge with the apprehension of federal fugitives. So it was a lot of warrant work. But night and day different compared to the patrol level officer that I was up at Seattle.
Okay. Now, for people who don't know, who haven't seen the video, can you kind of walk us through what happened?
Yeah. So basically, and let me give the caveat before I even explain, my video wasn't about the validity of COVID or if COVID's a hoax or the pandemic and all the things we're hearing now, right? My whole thing, I wasn't addressing any of those things. I was simply addressing from a patrol level officer, from someone that has sworn an oath to the Constitution, what we are allowed to do legally and what we are not allowed to do. And I saw a lot of officers nationwide that were enforcing these government orders, all the governor executive orders saying, hey, you can't be at the park. You have to stay in your house. You can't have your business open. You have to shut down your hair salon, all these things that we saw, right? From my perspective, I'm not saying those things were necessary or they were not necessary, but at the end of the day, those things had to be presented to the citizens as requests, not orders, because we don't have the authority to go and take people's freedoms away and put them in handcuffs and take them to jail because they're not obeying to a governor's executive order. As a law enforcement officer, we have to have a law that's been legislated, that's on the books, and we have to be able to pull from, it's called the Washington State Revised Code, and say, hey, this is the law that this person is breaking, and therefore we can take any type of enforcement actions. And so when I saw the cops doing like arresting surfers at the beach and all these things that we all saw that were like, what's going on? What is this? How do they have the authority to do that? I went and talked to my chain of command about it, my chief, my sergeant, and everybody was of the same mindset. Yeah, we don't have legal authority to do this stuff. And it's really bizarre what's going on nationwide. And so after a couple weeks of seeing this, I felt compelled to just make a video, me as an officer speaking to other officers and saying, listen, guys, we have to make sure that the citizens remain our priority, and we have to treat them with respect. We have to respect their constitutional rights, and we don't have the authority to be making these arrests and shutting down people's businesses and taking people's livelihoods away. That's not what our oath and our power that's derived from the state allows us to do. And so for me, it was a conflict because, yeah, that's my job, that's my livelihood, that's my career. But at the same time, we're going against our oath and we're going against our legal authority. And the interesting thing is every single cop that I talked to about this agreed with me. Every single one of them agreed with me. But once I made that video, I got a lot of pushback because in the video I said, you don't have to adhere to your mayor. You don't have to adhere to your governor if they're asking you to do things that are unethical. In fact, we're sworn to do the opposite. We should be refusing unethical orders. And that worked its way to the top, and people are like, hey, we got to get rid of this guy. You know, he's bucking the system. He's going to get cops to stand with the people, not the government. And I think everybody sees that this virus is being politicized, you know, and they're using it in certain ways. You know, for me, right out of the gates, you saw what got shut down, and then you saw what was deemed essential by the government. And I don't know, I know down in California, it's just as bad as up here in Washington or worse. But anything that padded the government's pockets, anything that provided income to the government, like the marijuana stores, the liquor shops, vehicle licensing, all the things that put money in the government's pockets, somehow deemed essential. Meanwhile, all of our private businesses, and I own a gym too on the side, you know, my gym had to be shut down, salons, and all of these different private businesses that were deemed non-essential. But then you got Walmart and Amazon and all these huge companies all deemed essential. It's just there was a lot of hypocrisy and things weren't adding up. And I just felt compelled to speak out against it. And ultimately, it ended up costing me my job. I ended up getting fired over on August 7th. So it took about a 3-month investigation. And they said I was being insubordinate. And to tell you the truth, man, I think it was a blessing in disguise because so much shit has happened between then and now that I don't know if being part of law enforcement is something that I'm interested in anyhow.
Yeah, I totally get you, man. I'm curious, guys, as you're going through that process of being investigated and like your career was on the line, your livelihood, your ability to provide for your family, what was your mentality like during that process?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I always live my life as like drawing hard lines, right? And my wife knows that as well. And once I make my mind up about something, I mean, it's the same mentality that I had as an 18-year-old going into the Ranger Regiment. This is where I stand. This is what I'm going to do. And if anyone has a problem with it, then that's going to be on them. Right. And so I told my wife, I said, this is where I stand on this. And this is where I believe my authority lies. And this is where I think that the profession is doing the wrong thing. And so I'm going to stand on the side of what I believe to be morally and ethically correct. And if it costs me my job, it costs me my job. And I don't have a problem with that. You know, it's like at the end of the day, I can go out and do something to feed my kids and pay my mortgage. I know that one way or another, it'll work out. So I'm not willing to compromise my integrity and what I believe to be the ethical way to act as an officer because I get a paycheck twice a month. You know, it was never even a consideration. And yeah, it sucks. I got 3 little kids and I got everything going on that everybody else does. But I knew that I wouldn't even be able to look at myself in the mirror if I stood on the side of what I believe is government corruption at this point.
Yeah, I can appreciate like that conviction that you have, because so many like people don't have that nowadays. But it resonated with people. Obviously, it got over 9,000 views. You know, I think Donald Trump Jr. Reposted it, and
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. He wrote me an email on Instagram saying that he was proud of me and good job. So yeah, it was interesting. It got seen millions and millions of times.
Well, it's a breath of fresh air when somebody just stands up and make a stance these days. Like everybody's just trying to please everybody, you know. And I just want to, you know, tell you, I commend you, you know, for standing up, speaking your mind, and making a stance and say, hey, this is who I am and this is who I'm not.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's a big thing. I mean, regardless of where people stand on things, I think it's just healthy to have a conviction one way or the other, you know?
Yeah. Now, in your video, you were talking about like standing up for your liberties, standing up for your rights. And I think a lot of Americans don't understand the importance of that and don't understand the value. Like, why does it matter if people's businesses are getting shut down? There's a pandemic. Like, they don't understand why there needs to be pushback. Why do you think that is?
You know, it's hard to say. I think the American culture has lived without a lot of consequences for a long time. I think the American way of life has had a lot of the edges nerfed, and our society has kind of been like a utopia for the last 50 years. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm grateful that my kids can walk down the street and they can go to the store and I don't have to worry about their physical safety. But as someone that's deployed all over the world, and I was in Iraq during the worst times, in Afghanistan, and I have different perspective of when people face corruption, when there's a power vacuum, when people are in tribal warfare, the human mind and the human capability can go very dark, and people can do very terrible things to each other. And I think people think that those are impossibilities in America. And I've always said, I think civilization is clinging on by a thread. I think this country keeps itself together. Just, it's a miracle that it works as well as it does. And I feel like if you start treating people in a certain manner and you start taking people's liberties away and chipping away and not allowing them to pursue the things that they need to do or feed their family or pursue their dreams, I just felt like at some point, there's going to be a tipping point where people say, you know what, fuck this. We've had enough. They're going to take to the streets and violence is going to erupt. And I talked about that in the video. I said, the American people are going to be, they're going to be woken. And when you wake that sleeping giant, law enforcement is not going to be able to do anything. Government is not going to be able to do anything. It's a ratio. It's a mathematical equation. There's so many disgruntled people that if they decide that they've had enough, we're in for a big problem. And it's interesting to see where the world's went in the last 3 months. And it took kind of a different turn with the racial injustice things and the how many people are upset about the George Floyd murder. But you can still see when Americans have had enough and you get these groups of people that are just going wild, it's hard to maintain civility. And that's kind of where we're at now. And I feel like there may be no end in sight. You know, it's hard to say where all this is going to go. But yeah, I felt like sooner or later, if you push people enough, because at the end of the day, you can say that there's restrictions due to a pandemic, but if my babies are starving at home because I can't go to work, what do you do with that? You know, like your priorities are your family and your livelihood. And I've always said, I think the pandemic will be kind of it should be something that kind of based on its own numbers and the danger that it is projecting on our country, that people will react accordingly. You know, if I thought that if my kids went out on the street, they would get sick and die, I'd probably keep them inside, right? But the evidence isn't supporting that. And so I think Americans are smart enough to look at what's going on and then make a risk assessment, do what they need to do to mitigate that risk, but then also at the same time have the ability to pursue their livelihoods in a way where they're not going broke. I'm sure you guys have plenty of friends and coworkers, just like I do, that are losing their businesses and are losing their livelihoods. And it's like, we have to weigh that. Yeah, there's definitely danger to the COVID virus. My best friend is a physician that deals with it every single day. And I hear a lot of those stories. But the other side of it is, if all we care about is taking care of the people that are in danger of getting the virus, and we just let everybody else go to the wayside, that's not considered success either, you know?
Yeah, like the people who are never going to be affected by the virus are being affected by the regulations because of the virus.
Exactly. And I think, I don't know, for me, it seems like the virus has absolutely been politicized and it's been weaponized. And now it's the right's version of the virus and the left's version of the virus. And the truth is somewhere in between, you know? And I think that if you are an at-risk person, if you are physically unhealthy, if you have comorbidities, if you're elderly, take the measures that you need to take to protect yourself. And we as a society should help those people. But I just don't see how after 6 months of this, we can still tell our kids they can't go back to school. Or yeah, like today, I don't know in California, but today in Washington is the first day of school. I have a 5, an 8, and 11-year-old, and they're all downstairs right now doing what we're doing, going to school on Zoom. You know, my 5-year-old's in kindergarten. It just isn't going to work, you know?
Yeah, for sure, man. Now, I'm curious because after the video, a lot of stuff has happened, like you mentioned, with the racial injustice, and police have been called into question even more.
Yep.
Ever have, man. But I'm curious, why do you think, I was listening to your podcast with Ryan Mickler, and you're talking about how, like, when you were a kid, cops were heroes.
Yeah.
Why do you think that degradation has happened over the last 50 or so years?
You know, I think there's probably a conglomerate of reasons of why that profession is now looked at in a poor light. And I'm not too proud to say part of that falls on the profession, you know, like cops could have behaved better. Cops could have, you know, there are bad cops within the ranks. I think the first thing that needs to happen for the profession to be looked at in a better light is we as officers need to condemn our own when they do things that are illegal, immoral, or unethical, right? But then the other side of that too is there's a narrative that's being pushed that all cops are bad and that all cops are racist. And you start to see that getting fed to people in the media. And what ends up happening is you have, you know, a minority, a huge minority of police officers that are bad people. Like I would say a couple percent, but the spotlight's always on them and it's on their action. And everywhere people go these days, they have one of these in their hand. And anytime a cop does something out of line, it's filmed, it's put on YouTube, and everybody sees that. And it's fed through all these media sources. And I feel like the profession overall has been being painted in a bad light because of the few bad officers that are out there. Because in my experience, and I'm not saying this to cover up for the profession, I have nothing to gain. I'm not a police officer anymore, right? This is just my own personal observation. The overwhelming majority of police officers are good-hearted people that want to help, that want to take care of their community, that want to just day in and day out take care of people and citizens. That's my experience, both in Los Angeles and in Seattle. And I've only worked in those two areas, but I feel like it's a very diverse area, you know? And I worked with officers and deputies of all ethnicities and sexes and religions. And across the board, I continued to find that most people in the profession are good people. But yeah, you know, I think it probably started back in 1994 with the Rodney King thing, you know, like people started to look at police officers as a profession and started to look at them kind of sideways. And it just continued to get worse and worse. And I feel like there's an ebb and flow. You know, when something bad happens, there's a lot of negativity projected on the profession. And then, if you look at like 9/11, after that, people were very respectful of police officers and firefighters because they saw a lot of cops and first responders doing good things, putting their personal safety aside to help others. And I think there's always going to be an ebb and a flow to how people view the profession. But right now it continues to ebb because you got the George Floyd thing. And then there's just been a handful of incidents that have taken place after that people just continue to basically look at police officers as monsters.
Oh, Greg, I mean, with all the videos being everywhere, everybody has an iPhone, everybody has a smartphone, everything's being filmed. I think the issue is that, the 1% of the cops who make a mistake or have bad judgment, they get blown out of proportion. And
for sure.
Thousands of things that they do good every single day never makes it. Like the news. The news doesn't want things that are going well. The news never talks about all the good stuff that's happening in the world. You open up the news is always bad. The world's falling apart. This is happening. That's happening. And same thing with these videos. All the stuff that cops are doing well, it never gets anywhere on the internet. Nobody wants to watch them. They're supposed to do well. They do one bad thing or one misjudgment. I'm for the cops. I understand all the cops. In all the cops, there are some good cops and bad cops. Mostly good. 99.9% are good people.
I agree.
Bad apples in any profession. But however, it gets blown out of proportion if there's one thing. And also, when I'm looking at all the stuff that's happening in the day, what happened for the respect for authority? If a cop tells me, pull over, put my hands on the steering wheel, well, shit, that's what I'm going to do. When you start resisting and then start reaching and they don't know what the hell you're reaching at and they don't know what the hell you're going for, what do you expect the outcome of that thing is going to be? So the respect for authorities is just gone.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And I've talked about that in some of my recent podcasts and videos is because the George Floyd incident was so atrocious and it was so hard for people to watch. Now, anytime a cop does anything, people are looking at them like they're trying to murder someone. Because like the Jacob Blake shooting that we saw last week, it's exactly what you said. No one puts any responsibility on Jacob Blake. None. And I've arrested plenty of people with warrants. And you know what they do 99% of the time? They say, hey, you got me. It's all good, man. It's all good. You got me. And they have their day in court. And that's it. Show me the video where a cop grabs somebody and handcuffs them and takes them behind their patrol car and shoots them. That's not happening. Cops aren't looking to just execute people in cold blood like people are portraying them to. If the people that are being confronted by the police and that are in trouble with our judicial system, like Jacob Blake had a warrant, he was resisting arrest, he had a weapon on him. Like there's a lot of extenuating circumstances that led up to him getting shot. And these things have to be investigated. And that's why, and investigations take months, right? But at the end of the day, you have to look at that situation and be like, yeah, he should bear a lot of responsibility for what happened too, because complying with the police, it's overwhelmingly easy.
Everything you said. And if I was resisting arrest, I probably would not walk towards my children.
No, yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. You're going to take a volatile situation that's developing and put your kids in the middle of it.
I will walk away from my children. If I'm going to resist arrest, I'm going to walk away from them.
Yep. And then you see the CNN headline, like father shot in the back in front of his kids, Yeah. And you wonder why people are outraged. And it's like, that's just because they're getting spoon-fed the narrative that cops are evil and they're just out looking to hunt people down, Yeah.
I'm curious on Jacob Blake specifically. Do you think that 7 shots in that instance is excessive?
Well, and this is going to sound gruesome, right? And for people that haven't been in combat, they don't really understand it. But when you decide to engage someone with a weapon, it's not because you want to just, like stop them from getting to the weapon or you want to momentarily disable them. At that point, you have made the decision that deadly force is necessary to protect your life. And 7 shots can happen in 3 seconds. And so what we found in Iraq and Afghanistan, because when we first started training before the war, you do 2 shots. So they call it like a double tap or a controlled pair. You come up, pop, pop, and then you move on, right? What you were finding is when you shoot someone 2 times, it doesn't do much to them. The human body is resilient. The human body is tough. And what they found through those wars is to stop people in a combat engagement, it takes 10, 15 shots sometimes. And so it was normal for people that, I mean, they would call it burning people down, and that's what they would do. And I understand that that's probably not like a politically correct thing to say, but in a combat scenario, it's very common for someone to get shot 10, 15, 20 times, because that's what it takes to kill a human being. And even if you're getting good shots, the human body still has minutes of life in it, you know, unless you hit someone like right in the brain, they still got fight in them. So it's a common thing that we see. And that's why it doesn't surprise me when you hear someone, oh, that guy got shot 20 times. Well, yeah, but there was 3 cops. And if you look at how fast it unfolds, a lot of times that's 3 seconds of engagement. And there's, I mean, you got these big adrenaline dumps. You've just made the decision to take a human life. You're in fear for your life, and you got that tunnel vision going on. 5 seconds later, it's over. And now you're being held to all this standard of everybody nitpicking every little detail on the internet. They have no idea what it's like to be standing there in that moment, you know?
Greg, where do you think the future holds for police officers and for our society? You know, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like, you know, if I was going to go to the police department right now, I'm like, wait a second, I almost have no rights that they have, you know, that everybody else have all the rights, you know, and I have no respect, no rights, and I have cameras all over me. So yep. I feel like, you know, like say if I was, you know, if Justin is working for me, it's like, I'm like this. I'm looking for him to make one little mistake so I can fire him. I don't think Justin would want to work for me if he was just like, I'm like this the whole time. Yeah. So where do you see the future?
You know, and something we say in the profession is if you look hard enough, you're going to find something, you know? So exactly what you just said. If you're looking over someone's shoulder 24/7, just scrutinizing every little thing they do, you're going to find something. I'm actually telling people right now, like my personal and professional opinion is if you want to be a police officer, I would look elsewhere right now. I would look into something else. And there's 2 main reasons for that. As a police officer, I work for a government agency. So I have government officials that are calling the shots, that are directing me, that are telling me what I can do and what I can't do, on one hand. On the other hand, you have the citizens over here that you're supposed to work for. You're supposed to be protecting. You're supposed to be enforcing the laws and the rules. And what we're finding now is that the higher up that you work for, they don't have your back anymore.
Oh, no. I mean,
they will hang you out to dry in a moment if it's politically beneficial for them to do so. So now you know the higher up of these agencies, they don't have your back. And then the other side of the fence is all of the citizens are looking at the profession with just disdain. And so you're going to be stuck in the middle here where you're working for people that don't have your interests, your best interests in mind. You're asked to do something dangerous and difficult. And then you're also going to be getting looked at sideways from all the citizens. Like, I wouldn't be interested in that anymore. You know, when I ended up getting terminated, I probably had 100 different sheriff's office offer me a job. They said, hey, we like your video. We like your message. If you want to keep being a deputy or an officer, come on board. And I'm not interested anymore, man. I just see the writing on the wall. And I think too many bad things have taken place that the current climate of law enforcement, I'm not interested. And if you look at what they're trying to do in some of these major cities, like Seattle, for instance, that's my city. They defunded the police by 50%. They think that taking away training and capabilities and weapon systems, they think that's going to help the profession. And what these people don't understand is nothing could be further from the truth. Because I want you guys to look at it like this. In Seattle, they say you can't use gas anymore. we don't want you shooting people with rubber bullets anymore. And meanwhile, these people are burning the city to the ground, smashing windows, stealing properties, flipping cars over, right? So then the city council says you can't use these tools on people, and they may think that that's protecting the people, but what that does is, right, on one side you have less than lethal, where I can mace somebody or I can tase someone. Way over on the other side, you have a lethal encounter where I've decided I need to take that person's life. You start taking away the tools in the middle. What you're going to do is you're going to bridge that gap, and you're going to move officers that much closer to having to go to their weapon. And that's actually doing the opposite of what they think they're going to do. They're going to increase the likelihood that there's a lethal encounter. And so with all these different things that I'm seeing, you know, you got mayors and city council members telling police how to do their job when they've never been a police officer. They've never been in a fight on the streets. They've never had to deal with someone high on PCP trying to fight them. And they're telling you how to do your job. I don't think that I can put myself in a position where I'm risking my physical safety while having to adhere to all these bullshit rules. You know, it just doesn't make sense anymore. And a lot of cops feel the same way.
And I lost so much respect for, you know, the governors and or the mayors who all of a sudden turned their back on their own police department. I was so disappointed. I was so disgusted, you know, especially here in California. I'm going like, you gotta be kidding me, man. Like, you know, I feel you.
And they're doing that, and they're pandering to the other side just so they get votes. That's what they're doing. You know, they won't even condemn rioting in the streets, you know?
Yeah, I saw in LA Unified School District, one of the biggest school districts in the country. They voted to like get rid of the campus police officers. And it's like, didn't you guys want those like 4 school shootings, all that stuff? Didn't you want that to protect your kids? And all of a sudden, they just, in a heartbeat, they'll turn their back on them.
But they'll be the first people to call the police when something goes sideways.
Well, and if you see, you start to see some of those videos coming out when things do go bad in the riots, the people that are screaming defund the police are now screaming for the police.
Yeah, I saw what you posted about the guy who got shot in like his forearm with the Rittenhouse situation, and how he was like he got shot and he was crying to the police like needing a tourniquet.
And they were all there standing against the police. You can't have it both ways, guys. Listen, if you want anarchy and you want to take to the streets and you want to burn stuff down and you want to be violent, when people stand against you, you don't get to run to the police. That's not how this works, you know? But that's what we're seeing.
I'm curious on your perspective of the training. You know, like back when the George Floyd thing happened, there were a lot of stuff that came out and said, it's easier to become a barber than a police officer. It's easier to get your driver's license, all this stuff. Talk to us about what goes into the training. And then as you're into it, you know, what's the upkeep of training like?
Isn't different departments different though?
Yeah. So every state has a different qualification for what you have to do to become a police officer. And some academies are 4 months, some are 6, some are 8. Mine was 6 in Washington State. But I think initially police academies do a pretty good job of trying to get people ready to be police officers. At least I felt like mine did, with the amount of time that they have. You have 6 months to teach someone how to be a police officer, and there's so much that goes into that. But the thing that I think a lot of people fail on is once they're out of the academy, they're like, hey, I made it. I'm good now. And training stops. And as you know, like, you can't say, hey, 3 years ago I was fit, 3 years ago I knew how to shoot, and just rely on that for the rest of your life. You have to stay proficient in all those things. And I think that's where a lot of departments are really, really lacking, is the maintained standard after you graduate. Because you got guys that are 10 years out of the police academy, and this is going to sound crazy, but police are expected to do shooting training and hand-to-hand combat training 2 times a year. 2 times a year. And I mean, what can you maintain proficiency in 2 times a year? You absolutely can't. And I was one of the instructors at my academy for our hand-to-hand combat stuff. I used to tell the guys, I said, do you think Conor McGregor trains twice a year before he gets in the octagon? You know what I'm saying? And they all laugh. No, of course not, you know? And I said, yeah. And you want to know what's even crazier is that the stakes for when you get in a fight versus when he gets in a fight are even higher, because you don't have a ref and you don't have a rule set. So for you to be a police officer that doesn't take training serious, I always say that comes down onto the individual officer. If this is the profession you've chosen, learn how to fight, learn how to use your firearms. But you want to know what's even more important is through confidence of having like a martial arts background and being proficient with your tools, through that confidence allows you to not operate with fear. And then you can connect and you can communicate with people more efficiently. And I saw it over and over as an officer. Like, if I'm confronting a felon or someone that I believe to be a dangerous person, I can be cool to that guy. I can respect that person. I can talk to him like we're talking now, because if it does go bad, okay, I'm ready for it to go bad. And that's a choice that he makes. That's not a choice that I make. But with a high level of confidence, I feel like you can de-escalate a lot of stuff. And I don't know, man. I think cops need training in not only the physical aspects of being a police officer, but just communication skills, treating people with kindness, respect, humility, all the things that are necessary to just interact with another human being back and forth and have that interaction go well. And so, yeah, man, I think training needs to be something that should be almost a focal point of being a police officer. Like, you go to work 5 days a week and one of those days is a training day and the other 4 days are on patrol or something like that, you know? But no, man, you'd be surprised. We train two times a year as officers. And then the other thing is, there's no physical standard after you graduate the academy. So you can get overweight, you cannot work out at all. And because everybody's protected by these police unions, like, once you're in, and you don't have to maintain any type of standard. And it's sad to see.
That sucks. I mean, there's no reason, that's why, they have that reputation. Oh, they're getting donuts. They're fat and out of shape getting donuts. And
yeah,
stuff, man. There's got to be a standardized way. Hey, dude, this is your profession. You need to be sharp with your tools. You need to be sharp with your weapon. And you need to be able to run after people. You know what I mean?
And when the day comes that you can't do those things, it's probably time to walk away.
No.
Maybe this should be, like, there's some guys that don't retire until they're 70 years old. And it's like, a 70-year-old man has no business confronting some dude popped up on methamphetamine. It just doesn't make sense,
Yeah, it's like, can you imagine like having that standard in the military? No physical standard. You train twice a year. Like, it doesn't make sense at all.
Doesn't make sense, no. And especially because I came from the Ranger Regiment, right? At any time in the Ranger Regiment, at any time, if you're asked to take a PT test and you're below the standard, you get one redo, because they'll be like, okay, they give you one chance, saying maybe you were sick or you had an off day or whatever. You get one redo. And if you're below the standard 2 times, you're gone. That's how you maintain a standard. You have to have consequences. You can't have standards if you don't enforce the consequences. And I mean, if you're not willing to accept that, then a career where you're carrying a gun and you're engaging people and you're fighting people, it might not be for you. It just is what it is.
Yeah. I was listening to Andy Frisella's podcast, and he was talking about like police and everything like that. And up until then, like, I didn't realize how much power they actually have. Like, they have incredible power, and it never like registered with me. But they can suspend your rights like based on their judgment, and that's really what it is. And it's it's crazy to have those type of people in those positions that aren't qualified to be there.
For sure. And I started my own podcast, and the last week's episode, I was actually with a veteran police officer that's been in the profession over 20 years. And we really go into that in detail, is that you, as the patrol level officer, the decisions that you make have lifelong impacts on the people that you're policing. So if you arrest someone and you charge someone with a crime, like if you charge someone with a felony, that's going to have lifelong implications for that person. And so there's a lot that you need to think about as the individual officer about what I'm doing to this person And it's not just what's happening right now, but what's it going to do to that person for the rest of their life, both financially, their ability to take care of their family. You know, if they're a multiple felon, if this is their third strike, there's a lot of different things that have huge implications. And I'm not saying that you have to weigh what you're doing necessarily with what's going to happen years later, but you have to understand that the decisions that we make as patrol level officers are life-changing for the people that we're interacting with. And that's why it's so important to maintain that moral and ethical presence and the way that you operate as a police officer. Because it gets, I'll tell you, man, everybody's guilty of it. When you deal with heroin addicts over and over and over and over that are smashing people's windows and taking things out of their car, it's real easy to want to take the humanity out of policing. And I think it's always important to try and remind yourself that that's a key component to being a police officer, is keeping that humanity into the job.
Yeah. And that's one thing I hope that doesn't happen with the negative light that's shown on police officers. I hope that they don't just get like pissed off at it and kind of retaliate in some instance. But yeah, man, I really think that there should be like not a defunding, but more funding. Like
exactly.
More training,
make it a more prestigious career.
Yes.
Make people like, oh, I strive to become a police officer.
Yes.
You know, I think that something along those lines can like really help change
more continued training, not only training, but continued training.
For sure. And that's the thing, man. I think it was like, even when I was growing up in the 80s, it's like, if I got separated from my mom, go find a police officer because they're your friend. They take care of you. That was the mentality. And I mean, I don't feel like it was that long ago, you know, but now they're teaching kids to run from police and that they'll hurt you. And you hear that a lot. Like that's the way that the culture is going. And so, yeah, who knows where it could go, man. I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast on how the government has neglected our inner cities and has neglected our youth. And I feel like all of these things are connected, because all the inner city violence, like I said, man, I lived in Los Angeles for a long time. Like there's a lot of things that need to happen to pull a lot of those cultures and a lot of those communities out of poverty and out of crime. And it's a lot more than just the patrol level officer. It's going to be a holistic approach from society, you know?
Yeah. I hope people have the foresight in charge to be able to make those changes and not just pander to them.
And you know, maybe it's just me becoming disgruntled, but I feel like the people in charge aren't interested in helping us anymore. They're just interested in maintaining their power and making sure that they get their votes, you know?
Yeah. You know, we'll see. And LA is not the best place for that. So
yeah, no.
Yeah, so we'll see, man. But Greg, you know, I appreciate you coming on, man. Why don't you plug your podcast, plug whatever you're doing, man? We'd love to send some people over to you.
Yeah, so my podcast is called The Endless Endeavor, and I'm releasing one episode a week. And what I'm doing is I'm finding someone once a week that has like an interesting background from the military, law enforcement, health and fitness, and just kind of really digging into their perspectives on what's helped them become who they are. And we're doing one episode a week. It's doing really well. So we're on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, all the big ones. And then outside of that, I'm just running my gym, man. It's Electric Jiu-Jitsu. It's up in Lake Stevens, Washington. And so far, so good, man. Things are going well. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and it's been cool.
Thank you so much for your time, brother. I mean, your insight, you know, your life experience, you know, the way you view things and the way you make a stance. Like you said, you draw a hard line. You know, I was just taking mental notes, you know, and I really appreciate it. Some of the things that you said here is something that I can personally apply to my life and become a better man, you know, from it.
Awesome, guys. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Greg. So guys, go check him out. Endless Endeavor Podcast. Follow him on Instagram. But I appreciate you coming on, man. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Greg.
Take care, guys.
Hey guys, if you liked today's episode, do me a huge favor. Go ahead and leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, leave me a review, and tag a few friends that you think can benefit from what we shared today. Really appreciate it. God bless.